Please welcome our superhero sponsor, Innovia, and their dynamic customer engagement specialist, Mary Malone. Today, Mary will be saving the day with their session-enhancing ERP Success, a strategic approach to training and engagement. Stick around after this dynamic duo session for a live Q&A with this real BC superhero.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Enhancing ERP Success, a strategic approach to engagement and training. I'm thrilled to be presenting today at Dynamics Can, and I'm thrilled to be part of the Innovia team, and we're thrilled to be a sponsor for the event. My name's Mary Malone, and I'm a customer engagement specialist on the Innovia team. Essentially, that's an account manager on steroids. All of the customer engagement specialists at Innovia are folks who've had a lot of industry experience, leadership experience, and at other companies. And so we serve an account management role, but we also help companies with their strategic approach to business and to their technology. I want to share my outline for the presentation today with you. And then I also want to acknowledge that a lot of my Innovia teammates lent a hand with pulling this together from different experiences with ERP projects, practical experiences, theoretical experiences, and presentations that they've done. So thank you, and a shout out to the Innovia team there. What I'd like to do today is to introduce the topic a little bit and then talk about why do ERP projects fail? And then talk about how do we organize for success, talk a little bit about project team and super users, training and testing, and then talk about the really important part of after the go live. So normally, if I was sitting in a big room and we were all able to be in person, I would actually go around the room and say, when you think of a project that you were on in your organization, something that was absolutely mission critical, how does that project get done? What are the characteristics of when a project is successful? And this would be a great time, by the way, to let you know that you have a chat box that you can use. So if you want to write some of the characteristics of successful projects there, or at any time, if you have any questions, you can certainly use the chat box to ask them, and then we'll follow up during the Q&A and answer them. But again, think in your mind, the most successful projects in your organization. When something is mission critical, how does your organization get it done? Because I think we learn from our successes, and I think it's very important to apply successes that we've had to successful ERP projects. And it doesn't have to be ERP here. It may just be a big warehouse project or production planning or an HR system. Think bigger and broader than just an ERP about how to be successful. When I ask people that, usually they share some combination of the following four ideas. They were organized. They were organized for success. They had good leadership for the project and for the overall organization. They put really good people. They had the right people at the right time on the projects. And they had a plan, and a plan that forced accountability with due dates and leaders holding people accountable, whether it was the partner, a vendor, an internal team member, or senior leadership. People were held accountable for making sure that the plan kept moving forward. So again, rely on your successes and bring what's been successful for other mission-critical projects into your ERP project. Well, so on the other side of that, when I looked out and started to say, well, why do ERP projects fail? Unfortunately, there's always more literature about failures than there are about successes. But when we look at the ERP projects that fail, we see some common themes in them. And the two that I want to focus on most today was the lack of commitment or engagement by stakeholders, particularly executive sponsors, but not limited to them. And then failure to train end users. Those show up time and time again whenever you look at articles or case studies about failed ERP projects. So I'm going to talk about both of them for just a minute. So project success really starts at the top. I think the single biggest mistake that we read about, that people talk about, is treating an ERP as an IT project. The ERP it's the platform from which you run your organization. It's the data that you need to make better decisions. It helps the business operate more efficiency, and it sets it up for scalability. So the ERP goes far, far beyond an IT project. The other part of it is that buy-in begins with the C-suite, but it's not limited to the C-suite. But absolutely, the executive support, the executive sponsorship has to be there. And the other thing that's really important is you made the software decision, you had an expected ROI, but the ROI won't be realized until after the project goes live. And so keeping the project moving towards its success, accountability for the dates really, really is important. So if I look at the four things I talked about earlier, organization, leadership, people, and the plan, I'll just give some ideas about them. Now, every organization is different, every project is different, and the size of the organization matters a lot too. It's different if you're implementing for 50 employee company than 5,000 employee company and everything in between. So I tend to think of 5 different groups that need to be organized into some project committee, team, etc., as you go through the project. So the first is your executive and senior leadership sponsorship, and what I like to think of as a digital transformation steering committee. It's not the IT or just technology, but this is a steering committee comprised of senior leaders of the organization focused on digital transformation, wherever that transformation is occurring. So it includes the ERP, but is certainly not limited to what you're doing with the ERP. How are you getting data in? What data are you able to get out? And how are you going to use that data to grow the business and influence your business decisions? After that steering committee, you're going to have the project, the core project team that's going to work on it. Now, again, depending on your size, that team may be supplemented by subject matter experts or just include your subject matter experts. But they're the project team. They're the people who are going to get it done. After that, you're going to have a group of super key users. Some of them may be on that team, depending on your size. Some of them may not be. And again, you're going to have key testers. Key, again, may be super users, depending on your size, may be a separate team. Then you're going to have everyday users of the system, and the folks that I think get left out is all the other employees. I'm going to refer to them a couple of different times. People who may not touch the system themselves, but who need to know about it, because to understand about the system is to understand your business processes and your work. So the leadership part. So again, I really look towards the leaders, the executive sponsors, your project managers, and notice I've put S's there. I think it's really important to think about redundancy, particularly in the key positions of executive sponsorship and project managers. We see that lack of engagement creates a problem in reasons that programs or ERPs were not successfully implemented. So if the executive sponsor leaves in the middle of the project, that cuts off that person's engagement, or likewise, even worse probably, when a project manager does. And so if you're redundant there, if you have co-sponsors, if you have co-project managers, first of all, they can share the burden, because these are often longer term projects, and people, their departments may be busier and less busier at different times, but also you're protected in the case that one of them leaves. And again, keeping the engagement up, it says something to the organization that there are 2 executive sponsors, that there are 2 project managers, that this is an investment that everybody can see in the engagement of the company in it. And then likewise with departmental leaders, you'll probably involve some of them. Maybe informal leaders will identify themselves as people who step up to do testing or otherwise. And again, I think the leadership is an opportunity throughout is to think about how you're developing your bench strength in leadership. So can people step up to new roles and learn about being a leader, or learn more of the business processes during the course of this project like that? And then people. So I want excited and enthusiastic people who are change junkies. And I think that's really important. Too often, when we look around to select people, we might be tempted to select people who are maybe a little bit less busy. Or maybe they aren't doing the best work in the current group they're in, and we think that they'll change when they get over to this group. And I would argue that those aren't the people you want. You want your all-stars. You always want to take your all-stars. Now, the problem is all-stars are good, and they're busy, and they're called on for lots of things. So you can't overburden them. But for a project like this, I encourage you to think about taking the all-stars, not the negative Nellies on the team. You also want people who have a bigger picture in mind of the business, or at least can see adjacencies between what they do and where the work comes to them or gets handed off to them. You also want people who are masters of their local contribution. And you also want to have this become, again, a career opportunity. The other thing to think about involving non-traditional people. And I'm actually mostly interested in maybe non-traditionally thinking about the role of HR and having HR be involved from the very beginning, since we know the other reason that people cite engagement and training, the HR team are really could play a key role in keeping the training ongoing from the very, very beginning of the project. And then finally, the plan and accountability. So most ERP projects start with a plan. So I'm less worried about the plan than whether or not we're working our way through it and whether or not people are being held accountable for the results of the plan. So one of the ways that increases accountability, in addition to having good leaders, is to make the plan highly visible throughout the organization and let everybody know what the team is working on. And let everybody know when there are benchmarks to be celebrated, and widespread communication that engages, again, keeps the engagement high. Not that this is the IT or not that it's the ERP, it's our ERP. It's the backbone, it's the technology around which we run our business. And I think the more people they see that the project in that way, the more engaged they can be, the organization can be throughout. I think training, if you will, training should start early. And that is by announcing the plan to the entire organization, talking about the name of it, talking about who's on the core committee, maybe give a great name to the core committee. So that, again, people are engaged and seeing that this information is really important, and achieving this plan is important as well. Plus, if people are publicly aware of it, it helps the individuals who are participating in it to be more accountable, not just to the committee, but to the institution at large. Now, how to support the teams. You can read a lot of the different ways. Actually, I think one of the most important things is pizza helps, right? There's no team that or your local equivalent of pizza that doesn't mind getting a pizza every once in a while when they're working really hard together. But I think the teams are well supported when the individuals understand why they're there, what role is expected of them, that they have company-wide support, and that there's regular meetings, and that there's a cadence to it, again, with celebration. But the other thing that's really important is if you've taken your A team, they were already busy. These are people who are generally busy. They're the best, they're busy. What is it that you're going to do that helps provide backup for some of the things that they were doing on a daily basis that will then allow them the time to fully participate and to be anxious to participate in this team? It's also a learning exercise for them, in some cases, to learn how to delegate some of the day-to-day stuff back to their team so that they can free themselves up. Again, a lot of leadership development very intentionally can engage the organization throughout the ERP implementation. Now, we have some ideas, and I've taken these ideas so you can screenshot them and save them about some of the roles that a core team member might play. Again, every organization is different, but these are some of our ideas about the roles of different kinds of members of the team. So this would be for a core team member. And the idea is to move, if you will, I know this is hard to read, but to move from the typical current state of an organization where you see the individuals, the men and the women in the picture, where they don't have, the purple is business knowledge and the orange is system knowledge, and nobody has a whole view of what's going on. Each has a limited view into a desired future state when, even though nobody's knowledge is perfect, more of the individuals have a better understanding of the business and of the system and how they relate. And the goal would be to increase that across the organization as much as possible. And you're getting more out of the technology, better decision making as well. So then we also think that super users are a great idea, again, depending on your size and your particular situation. But getting a core group of super users together helps you to leverage your technology and how you have increased ownership and accountability for the technology in use. And they have peers with whom they can relate and learn together. I'll come back to things that you can do after go live, but super users can play a really important role in a successful implementation. Again, I'm not going to read all of the roles to you, but they are, again, you want people who are enthusiastic, who are change masters, who know their area, who can possibly train or be taught how to train, can do some of your testing, etc. Again, a super user really elevates problem solving from perhaps from an IT department or one person who knows the ERP or a small group of people to spreading that knowledge throughout and our first line of defense, if you will, and offense, both in teaching people, in spotting new functionalities, in identifying problems, etc. Now, what's in it for them? Done right, a super user role should be part of their evaluation, maybe participate in some kind of bonus for doing that role. They get early involvement and they get a chance to skill up, the great new buzzword in HR. So they can grow their tech skills or communication skills, learn about project management, learn about the ERP, learn about the business processes. So again, you're giving them something in return for being a super user, and again, hopefully also creating that bench strength for leadership positions later on. Again, there's lots of benefits to having them. Again, it's that enthusiasm for technology throughout the company, peer groups that can relate to each other, and growing the leadership team. So why do ERP upgrades fail? So we talked about engagement, and if you've got any questions about engagement or how you might organize or pick the people or hold yourselves accountable for your plan, this would be a great time to put them in the chat box. And again, any questions that you have around the engagement and organization for success. From here, I'm really going to talk about the other part of the presentation, which is going to look around the failure to train and particularly train your end users. I think that there's opportunities to train those end users, as I've mentioned, from the project kickoff and throughout the project, but then at other places, initial user testing and go live, and then ongoing afterwards. There's always turnover, so you want to make sure that you're prepared for that. And then there's reasons to document things that you've done and keep documenting them as regulatory changes come or you need to make changes to SOPs or in good manufacturing practices are just some examples of ongoing reasons that you need to keep people trained. You know, one of the trainings that I hear most about is sort of how do people get trained? You know, there's one person person and they know their job and maybe they overlap with somebody for 2 weeks, or they take a couple of screenshots, and then that person knows. And then that person may train the next person. And then, so pretty soon you're 5 people away from the original person who was trained. And just like an old-fashioned game of telephone, it doesn't work very well. And so now, 5 users later, they only have bits and pieces of it, as opposed to that overall understanding that people had on when they went live about the interrelationship between the work that they do and the adjacencies to other and different departments. So again, training is going to be a big emphasis. Now, there's lots of challenges to training. People are, it's been a long project. Maybe it's been 6 months, maybe it's been 18 months, maybe it's been longer. And people just want to get it live, But, their lack of engagement with the stakeholders around training in the first place, or there were no resources allocated to the project. Most people recommend between 10 and 20% of the project time be spent on training activities, but as things happen in projects, it may have gotten cannibalized by cost overruns someplace else. And then beyond that, even when training is held, there's all sorts of reasons that it may not be the right training at the right time. I do think, though, and I want to go back to the cannibalized or the resources weren't allocated or lack of alignment. This is where I go back to maybe it's real important to have somebody from HR, somebody who's really thinking about human capital, engaged right from the very beginning on the ERP, on the core team, and as a separate pathway is working to develop the learning strategy around having this ERP. Short-term and long-term, how it may link into your learning management system, which I'll talk about in just another minute. So training matters. You can find any number of statistics about people who leave because they didn't get trained well, people who wouldn't recommend the company because of gaps in their approach to learning. People consider more and more growth and opportunity, which comes with additional training and additional learning, to be an important part of what an employer offers. Again, this training ties into the bigger macro themes around growth and business success in today's environment. Again, training really matters. Now, one of the things I've often heard about training is, the age-old, well, what if we train them, we invest in them, and then they leave? And I've always thought that the best answer to that question is, what if we don't and they stay? There's a risk either way. I think the risk of keeping untrained people around outweighs the risk of having a trained person leave. And on top of that, training tends to keep people staying longer. So again, very important philosophy, strategically, how do you think about training? And that will drive a lot of the training approaches. So on a more tactical level, to think about who needs to be trained. Who knows what users need to know? Are they the super users? Do you already have an internal BC kind of a group, a user group in your organization? What needs to be taught? I mean, everything from what is the system, to very role specific actions that they need to take, and everything in between. What needs to be taught, and then questions about what needs to be taught and when. What needs to be taught to a new employee who comes in tomorrow after the go live training's been completed? What happens if you implement in July and your year end's not until December? How are you going to know how to do those infrequently performed projects? And then a lot of times we ask people to sit through very, very long trainings for a whole process, when maybe a sub-process training of just-in-time training for this might be more appropriate than having a large process all done before somebody sits down to actually do it. Then there's how to organization. How will somebody access it? How do you present it to them? And are e-learning tools appropriate for this? And again, those are very strategic decisions, but e-learning in general through your learning management systems may be able to make the information available through a learning portal. It may capture information in a variety of different formats. So people may be able to learn from slides or from handouts or from an audio or from clicking through the processes that they're going to use on a daily basis. Again, it all depends on what group. What does this particular group need to know and when? How do you keep your information current? And then do you want to use learning analytics and measure how well your teaching, your training is going? I think the other important thing is to realize or to talk about for a minute the opportunities that you can realize by taking this approach both to engagement and to training. First of all, teams, well-formed teams, well-led teams following a plan can become closer. You can really break down a lot of the silos that may exist in your organization. People understand, again, the work that's coming to them and where it's going, much better to have a sense of those business processes. Cross-training is also good. People go out on leave. My goodness, this past year, we've learned a lot about what happens when someone's out sick for a while. If people are cross-trained, they can support each other in that. When people take different kinds of leaves or vacations, you don't want to have somebody not be able to go on vacation because they're the only person who knows the system. It helps with cross-training as well. Again, that upstream, downstream, understanding the business processes are all very good. And those teams then can bring ideas. They get comfortable bringing ideas forward and to continue the flow after the project. So afterwards, the go live happens and, you shake everything out for a month. And the project team had better have a bigger celebration than just pizza, I would argue. But what happens next? And so, again, a very strategic approach to thinking about this is how do you continue skilling up? How do you do continuing education? One is to host, if you don't, host regular lunch and learns for all users, or as I mentioned before, set up internal user groups. Create a curriculum for people and say, here's 10 classes we think that you should take that'll help your knowledge of the ERP, but of our business as well. You can keep the team involved in when you add functionality and continuing to do your UAT as you add different pieces to the ERP software over time. And you can also include key users when you go to do process improvement projects of any kind, because those key users, core team members and super users, have been exposed to the business processes that you have from beginning to end at some point during the core project, and they'll be even better at being able to participate in process improvement projects because they understand your business, but also because they understand the flow, if you will, of making process improvements that happen when you implement an ERP. The other thing is to encourage people to participate in external user groups. Shameless plug here. The Dynamics user groups, absolutely critical for participation. The community around knowing you're not the only person, that other people have solved for this is incredible. So expect in people's job descriptions, expect them to participate and reward them for participating in groups like this. And encourage and reward them for Microsoft or other course completion or certifications. Make that part of the expectation of the organization, that you'll invest in them to continue to learn and to continue to get better at their craft, if you will. And that allows the ERP to continue to support the entire organization and the people in the organization to support the ERP. So very quickly, I just want to talk about some conclusions. We started out thinking about the strategic importance of both engagement and training. And it's really about setting yourself up for success. How are you going to organize this project? How are you going to put together the right committees? How are you going to put together the right structure that's going to lead you to a successful outcome? Again, acknowledging that all the organizations are of different sizes, how do you organize your executives, your core team members, your users, your super users, et cetera, to get the right people on those committees, to be following a plan, to be holding themselves accountable for producing the results of the plan. And then secondarily, but just as importantly, how do you view the role of training? And can you start the training strategically on day one? Because we know that training is key to user adoption, to ERP adoption. But unfortunately, when we look at projects that fail, it's often considered an afterthought. It may be cannibalized, the money for it may be cannibalized during the process. And it's only a strategic focus on that importance to the organization that will keep the money there so that you can realize the return on investment for your organization and have more success going forward. So I thank you for spending time with me today. You can learn more from me at malone@inovia.com. And I'm going to be happy to look at any of the questions that you've put in about any aspect of this presentation with my colleague Gary Harpino in just a moment. Again, I want to thank you for being here, spending the time with me today. And again, I want to give a shout out to my colleagues at Inovia who were great at helping me pull together their ideas and suggestions of resources from the many projects that they've done as a team, as individuals, and with the Inovia team. So thanks a lot. See you in a minute. Bye. Hi, Gary.
Hey, Mary.
I think we're live now.
You are live. Okay, so we are live. So I'll let you kick it off, Mary.
Well, so Gary, when we were talking about this presentation and we were working on some other ones, talking about pulling together the resources for this, I think one of the things that struck me as I looked across sort of different projects that I've been involved on is the lack of investment in the upfront to get everybody else engaged. And I was wondering if your experience was similar to that, or when you look back on projects that you worked on, did people make that investment up front in big projects, sort of structure and process to get the desired outcome?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've seen in the projects that I've been involved in has been probably the lack of commitment to the training piece. As we look at the overall budget, we look at the overall hours associated with doing a project, we find ourselves trying to get it done with less resources, and training usually is the one that gets cut short. The ones that have been most successful have been trained during the pre-testing session, retrained with a Q&A session afterwards, and then a follow-up 2 weeks after post-go live. That is probably the best model that I've seen, and where I consider the user group inside the customers being the most prepared to do their job and actually take full advantage of the systems.
So when you think back on that one, did they have a particularly talented group of super users who did a train the trainer model, or did they bring most of the users in from the very start and kind of trained everybody simultaneously?
Yeah, it really depends on the size of the company. In small companies, the medium-sized companies, it is the full group that's usually involved up front and active in the training all the way through. In larger groups, it is a subset where you're doing power trainers or power users to do the further training down the road. The best way to do it is to document it and get it into training modules so that an individual doesn't have to repeat. You can actually put that in your library and actually use that as a self-teach type of a session for the bigger audience. I will have to say, Mary, one of the biggest frustrations that I see with clients that come to Enovia for help has been the lack of training, though. Just to put a plug in, and people always say, well, our groups are frustrated because they don't know how to do it. They don't know the shortcuts. They don't know why they're doing it. They're just kind of clicking buttons. So those are the groups that come to us, and then we basically put together a training session for them. So,
I think that's a really good point. I go back to we've played 5 games of telephone, and sooner or later, 5 rounds later, there's almost no reference point back to that original one. And I think to make sure that the training then gets documented somewhere in a learning management system, or some kind of more sophisticated way than just, here's a piece of paper, click these, handwritten notes, click these 5 things in order to process an invoice or to put a sales order in. That, I think that's another piece where you lose the return on the investment of a good system, is when people can only click in and just do their job, as opposed to thinking of the adjacencies and how do these things relate to each other. And I also think it limits the individual who's not getting trained from, wanting to stay engaged and maybe, apply for another position in the organization or take on additional responsibilities there. Just do their job, as opposed to thinking of the adjacencies and how do these things relate to
Mary.
each other. And I also think
yeah.
I'm like, something happened there. I'm not sure what it is, but we're all learning new technology.
I'm sure it was on my end, and it was echoing, wasn't it?
I think it was, but
okay, we got it stopped.
At least I feel lucky. Sometimes I don't have good internet service, so I feel good that today's one of the up days
right
for that. So the other thing I want to go back, we talk about training. I think the other part is, do you have any ideas or hints about getting senior leaders involved? And I'm going to reference a couple of things here in my life in Enovia, but in prior lives where we're dealing with the person who has responsibility for the project on a day-to-day basis, and even maybe a semi-strategic basis. But the organization leadership really needs to be called upon to support it. And I guess a simple example of that is how, if we need to pull somebody into the project, whether it's a short-term subject matter expert or someone's going to be engaged with the team for 6 months, their boss has to be aligned with the project. And their bosses, their leaders' alignment with the project really has to be set by the leadership level. And if those leaders aren't involved, that person may, and as an individual, may want to help the project team, but may not be able to put the time aside for it. I'm wondering if you've seen any good ways that people have dealt with that issue.
I think the suggestion that you made in the presentation around HR being assigned and actually keeping an eye on it and getting involved in it was probably the best way to do it. If not HR, then it has to be someone else. And typically I've seen operations leaders do it, where they take the role and make sure that their people are properly trained and have the ability to get the information in to the system in a timely manner and not disrupt their normal flow of operations. So the more they get involved up front, the more interest they pay in it and make sure that their people are trained, goes a long way. So if not HR, I would say ops is probably the second best that I've seen.
So we have a couple of people have made some comments, and I couldn't agree more with this one, Gary. It says that ongoing training on new features is also critical. And in hindsight, customers that invest in the ongoing training are better users and happier and have a better ROI. And yes, I agree with that. So it can't be just the static the day that you put it in. It's got to clearly go beyond that. So, but yes. So,
absolutely. The ongoing reinvestment of training, if you get trained one time and that's all you do, you're really missing an opportunity to further utilize the system to its full capacity. Because the more people learn, the more questions they ask, the further they take their knowledge, which digs deeper into the capability of the system. People that start out with training and that's all they get will never move the system forward.
Yeah. And I think so, as much as it's a waste of the system, we always talk about people don't use 100% of their ERPs. I think it's also a waste of the human capital too, to limit somebody into only being able to do that one thing with as well, like not letting them, if again the buzzword du jour is skill up, but I think it's a very important thing, whatever we call it, that people continue to have that ability to do that. So so I see some questions coming in, Gary. You're gonna take, okay, are you gonna
So the one person said that they have they went from nav 1.3, and it's not a typo, to BC 16, and basically wave 2 for 25 factories in 9 states with 365 production lines. So a very large manufacturing. When you mention SMB customers in the US and how you handle training with end users versus power users, how many users are in those implementations?
So first of all, let me just say that the person that went from 1.2 to BC 16 in 25 factories with one full day of training, and they went live in one day.
One day, right.
One day to go live in 25 factories in 9 states, 365 production lines. They could never have done that without a lot of training and testing. So kudos to the organization who really focused on that. And then the question about, how many you need, it's one of those, because, BC Nav covers so many different sizes of businesses and so many different, you can just put in the financial part, or you can do warehousing and distribution and, manufacturing. I think it would be difficult to say that there's a one size fits all. I think, at least in my mind, and this is something maybe I didn't emphasize enough in the talk, I think you need to think about it from redundancy standpoint. So I would say, you probably want 2 people from each of the major functional areas in a super user group. And partially that's because if a project's going to take a while, people get sick, people go on vacation, people leave, there's any number of different things that could happen. I always like to think somebody may win the lottery, Powerball numbers come in, and that's their last day. So I think the redundancy of having a couple of people from each functional area is at a minimum what I would say to put in sort of the power users of the super user group. But again, I think that depends on your size as well. I don't know what your experience has been with that, Gary, but that's kind of where I think it is.
That's about the same, Mary. I would agree with your direction there. I guess the other question they had was, being a small, lean organization who's taken a leap from GP 2016 to BC Cloud, when resources are scarce, how do you spread the team so that burnout doesn't occur? And is that any different?
I always say this is a big project for an organization, right? Your organization has done lots of other big projects. So when you've had other big projects where you've been successful, what do you do to avoid burnout on those big projects? Right. There's all sorts of tactics that I've seen, to everything, again, depending on how big projects are and how long they take, having the team kind of take vacation, before the project gets started, and then kind of have a midpoint in a huge project where people kind of regroup and know that they have that time, couple weeks off from the project. And it's a lot of it's a lot of leadership. It's encouraging the team. It's setting them up for, this is going to be a bigger project and we're going to require a lot of you. But then it's also, how do you backfill the job that they were doing? And that's a chance to give other people opportunity to step up their game as well.
Yeah, I think the thing you hit on during the presentation around recognizing people and rewarding people along the way goes a long way to not letting people get burnt out. I remember my days. I spent 29 years with one company, and in that company, there was an 8-year period where I did the same job. Now, it changed over time, but it was the same job for 8 years straight. And I approached burnout multiple times during that 8 years. And I just remember the thing that kept me going is people stopping and thanking me and rewarding me. And then it just kind of rejuvenated me and kept me going. So don't forget to reward people, and don't forget to recognize the effort that it takes to train and get people up to speed.
So, and I think it's important to know that sometimes we think, or we're quick to think, that reward has to be monetary. I just a quick story, because I think there are a couple more questions that we'll get to as well. I think Mark is sending them over to us. But I remember I was gone a lot at a former job, and I was traveling, and I remember that I came in on a Saturday because I'd been gone for quite a while, and I was leaving again on another extended trip. And my boss had handwritten me a note and put a $20 gift card for my favorite pizzeria place. And he left it on my desk knowing that I was coming in on a Saturday. And honestly, he overpaid by $20 because just the note made all of the difference in the world. The $20 was nice, don't get me wrong. Rocco's Pizza is fantastic, but it was the note, that the recognition that I was working hard and somebody saw that. And I think we forget sometimes as leaders, as managers, the power that we have to make people, to appreciate people and make people feel appreciated there. So one of the questions that came in is the Microsoft Stream and the ability to make quick 5 to 10 minute videos, training sessions. I think that's a great comment. We have so much more technology for training, whether they're companies outside of us and big learning management systems, or just within the Microsoft ecosystem, that allows us to think differently about how we do those trainings. And again, those 5-minute ones, sometimes you need a big session, but quick reminders and, refreshers, and breaking down a big project into a big process into 5 small classes on it. 5 minutes each might be a better way to go and help us better with our memory. We tend to forget things when we get overwhelmed with new stuff all at once. So.
Right. So there was one question here, Mary, around rapid decision-making and stakeholder engagement. How many input stakeholders is helpful? How many is too many?
Again, a piece of that's going to be based on your size, But I think, I guess I would say that if you set up the project well in the first place, the number of decisions you're going to have to make while you're in the middle of it, you're going to have made it smaller. And then if you have a well-structured team, the core team's working on stuff, if they need a decision to be made, they ought to be able to go to the executive sponsor, a small group of people, and say, we need this decision by X a week from now. What do you need to help us make this decision? The other side of that is that team, the executive sponsor team or whoever's going to make that decision, they have to know and be available throughout this process either. Like, they can't sit on their hands. But if they're engaged and they're participating in a weekly or monthly status calls, they ought to know what kind of decisions are coming up. So,
Right.
but I go back to, like, if your company's not good at rapid decision making, you're not going to suddenly get good at it during the ERP process, right? Like,
Right.
So a piece of it is you ought to have some, if you think you're going to have to make some rapid decisions, get some rules in place at the beginning for it, especially if that's not a habit that your company's in.
Right. We got another question here. I think it's important to note that people learn in different ways. Some people are good with being shown how to do something where others might need hands-on approach. I've received training in the past where we were labs, step-by-step guide on how to do something functionally. This was useful because I got to practice.
Yeah, and I think one of the benefits of using different learning management systems is because they do appeal to people who learn differently. I'm a reader. I need to read about it first. I don't want to experiment with any buttons until I've got a top to bottom sense of what it is that I'm going to do. Other people learn very differently, and they want to dive right in and see somebody click the actual things that they're going to click. Other people just want the freedom to experiment around with it and then come back and learn it. So I think that it's important as you're thinking about training to recognize that you're gonna need all different kinds of media probably to be the most effective at it. That you're gonna need several different kinds of media and different kinds of instruction too. Lectures don't work for everybody. Small group discussions may be the place. Pairing two people up to learn together may be the right way to go. So I could not agree more with that comment. So,
with the technology where it's at today, the recording is a powerful tool. So if you do have demonstrations or you're having a training session, record it so people can go back and listen to it a second time. They can go back and pause it and play it and go forward and backward until they do get it. So don't forget that recording when you're doing any kind of training out there. So we're about out of time, Mary. So I would say, thanks everyone for participating today. Hopefully you found this useful. I'll turn it back over to you, Mary.
Well, great. Well, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. It's something that we're all very interested in having the most successful implementations that we can have. And so it's good to continue to focus on training and engagement and how they can make a big difference for you. So thanks for the community for inviting us. Thanks to my colleague, Gary, for hosting this conversation. And thanks to my teammates at Innovia for sharing their thoughts and ideas that made this presentation better. So take care, everybody.
Okay.